In order to reach meaningful business outcomes, meet shareholder expectations, and compete in the world of innovation and ever-rapid changing technology, we need to find ways to leverage the best of our global and diverse talent. Our next segment will focus on empowerment and beyond. My name is Rachana Bhide. I run global talent for Bloomberg Engineering. That is comprised of 5,000 software and infrastructure engineers around the world. I also report headline news for Bloomberg Radio London each day. And I run a project for women to tell positive, impactful stories about male allies in the spirit of gender partnership, which we heard a little bit about on the previous panel. Again, our panel today is about empowerment and beyond. And while our guests are entering the stage, I'd like you to please join me in welcoming our three panelists. So first we have Amy Bohutinsky. Amy is the COO of Zillow Group. Amy is responsible for, among other things, diversity and inclusion and hiring. Amy was one of the first employees of Zillow Group, and she's going to be talking about what Zillow is doing to allow people to bring their full selves to work and create a culture of belonging. Next, we have Randall Tucker. Randall is the Chief Inclusion Officer at MasterCard. In his longstanding commitment to D&I throughout his career, Randall has spearheaded and developed global female leadership programs, and he focuses on helping organizations evolve in how they think strategically about diversity and take action. Welcome, Randall. Both Randall and Amy are two of over 100 members of Bloomberg's Gender Equality Index, and we are really excited to have you both here. And finally, we have Janice Bryant Howard. Janice is the CEO of workforce management company ActOne Group. She is the first woman, African-American woman, to run a company with over $1 billion in revenue. But Janice has said she doesn't want to talk about being the first. She wants to talk about what's next. And so we will hear from Janice this evening about what she's doing with universities, what she's seeing from agencies and government entities that she works with. Welcome, Janice.
Thank you.
So again, we're going to be talking all about empowerment today. And as you hear from our panelists, I encourage each of you, somewhat in the spirit of the takeaways we heard from the last panel, to think about one specific thing in the area of empowerment that you feel your organization is doing right, or that you would like to see some improvement on through the life cycle of the employee experience, because we're going to be talking all about attracting talent, recruiting, retaining, and developing. So with that, Amy, I'm going to start with you. You've been with Zillow since its inception, where at the time there were very few women. Fast forward us to today. What has Zillow been doing in the last couple of years to attract empowered, diverse talent?
Yeah, when I started 13 years ago this summer, when I started with Zillow Group, which was then Zillow, we were about a dozen people building a product for the first time. A couple of us happened to be women. Over time, a few years later, I got pregnant. I took the first maternity leave. We didn't have a maternity policy. I had to kind of figure it out as I went along. Fast forward to today, we're a 4,000-person company. 42% of our employees are women, so we're doing pretty well. There's room for improvement. But today, there's a lot that we do structurally and organizationally to hire candidates that are men, women, of all groups, but also retention is something we focus on a lot, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the nitty-gritty of that, but it's a conversation at the most senior level that we have all the time. It's the reason, I'm on this panel as Chief Operating Officer, that it's something I care very deeply about. Spencer, our CEO, cares very deeply about.
And how quickly did you reach the 42%?
Not quickly enough. I mean, so we didn't, like a lot of companies in tech, and quite honestly, a lot of companies in America, this wasn't something that we really deeply focused on until quite recently. We did okay on gender diversity, frankly, because there were a couple of us women in the beginning. Data shows, and our data shows that women hire teams with more women, and that propagates throughout the organization. But it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago that we got really serious and said, how can we organizationally make change? What are the things we can do? So in the last 5 years, I think it's grown from about 30% to 42%. Within our tech, which is one of the most difficult areas of the organization to grow this, but within tech jobs, it's grown from, I think it was in the teens to around 30% are women today.
So that's remarkable, and yet it still takes time to see results, whether you're measuring for women, gender, or other underrepresented groups. How do you keep the momentum? Janice, I'll ask you, how do you keep the momentum and keep people feeling empowered when the numbers take a while to catch up?
Well, we've got to understand that numbers are simply the information we're measuring. So we've got to be articulate and we've got to be intentional about what we're measuring. You know, I grew up, and I'm likely the senior person on this stage, but don't get it twisted, I'm the most magnificently mature millennial you'll meet. The thing is, I grew up in an environment where a woman's place was in the home. And in our organization, we have a process for making sure that we're iterative about the empowerment of women and inclusive of everyone. You know, one of the things Maggie said that's really important is about how very important it is words are. Words are highly intentional. So what we do is we actually have a programming. Please take notes and check with us later if you want more information on it, because I'm going to be brief about it. We have what we call a place to secure, to make sure we're ensuring the place. The P is about making sure that we're very clear and we're very intentional about how we pay and how we promote people. That's got to be absolutely clear, and it's got to be measured. What happens in many environments is, well, I'll get to that later. The L is about listening. Not simply listening empathetically, but holding listening sessions, again around the iterative importance of empowerment. What you said just now, Amy, that existed at Zillow at one point was different for you, but it needs to continue to grow. So we've got to be highly iterative, and and what happens is many times I get to see what corporations say. I get to experience what they do in my work. And we see corporations engage oftentimes in external listening efforts or third parties coming internally to listen and not really listening to the people. Hold listening sessions, hold them pointedly, intentionally, with thematic understanding of what the outcomes you're seeking to be. So that's the L. The A is about actionable versus aspirational goals. Many companies talk about their goals around empowerment as aspirational. What I'm getting at here is that if you're not paying and punitive about people achieving that, then it is not as valuable to you as the other things in your organization that you are paying and are being punitive about. You do not allow people to be aspirational about your financial portfolio. You do not allow people, you're laughing, laughter means familiarity. You do not allow people to be aspirational about how they achieve any of the outcomes that you drive your P&L or you drive your bottom line to. So if you're not then holding people in a position where they understand the pay and the punity around empowerment and growth, then you're not as serious about it as you say you are. And it's kind of dumb, because you've already heard this from the first panel, that inclusive organizations, teams that are inclusive, do produce better. The C in place is about conscious care. I'm not talking Obamacare, whether it lives or dies. Although I care whether it lives or dies. I'm talking about something very important, because we cannot empower women at one level, or any group of people at one level, and not have them prepare for that care at a beginning level. And so we've got to understand that when we're often talking about young families, we're talking about people with child care needs. Conscious care. If your child care is near your home, you're not going to get to do the after hour or the before hour things in a thoughtful and dynamic way. You're not going to stay the 5 minutes longer if it's going to be $500 more this month in child care. Care about that. And then the E is about educating intentionally. Most smart companies are hiring people with an understanding of where that role needs to be, not where it is today. Start educating all of your teams in that way. I'll close with this. There's one woman, Professor Beck, Dr. Beck. She is head of California Channel Islands University, and I've been working with her. She's doing some dynamic things about actually taking predictive data and creating those courses that will allow her students to graduate ready for the jobs that will exist then versus what people are recruiting for now. These are things people can do. So PLACE.
Well, you bring up a couple of good points, and I think your P at the beginning was pay and promotion, but you mentioned punitive and also predictive analytics.
Yes,
so that's
yes.
my gift to you if you want to
Yes.
throw those in. However, one of the things you did mention that I think is really striking, and Randall, maybe you can comment on what you're doing at MasterCard, is preparing people, P, another P, preparing for the next generation of jobs that don't exist. How can we tailor those jobs and also look at them from a diversity lens? How are you handling some of the new trends and the new workforce that's coming in?
Well, you know what, I actually just landed here a few hours ago because I was in our HR leadership meeting, and parts of those discussions were around AI and how that's going to affect the workforce, as well as diversity and how the gap in skill sets of people of color as well as women moving forward in the workforce. What is that going to look like with all these other elements coming into place? You know what, at MasterCard, we, at the end of the day, want to create an inclusive environment and diversity at all levels just because it just makes good business sense. And so we take a look at and we understand at all levels of the organization that we need rich diversity. And so whatever that looks like for us in our teams, that's what we'll ultimately try to achieve. Whether or not that job role looks like X today or it'll look like Y tomorrow, at the end of the day, we still need that diversity because we feel that at the end of the day, the perspectives that are brought to the table in different ways, from different backgrounds, different upbringings, different ages, different sexual orientations, different colors, different, whatever that looks like, we need that. So I don't care what the job is going to be. We just need to know that that diversity is there, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, you mentioned AI and tech, and you also mentioned that you were part of a human resources team. Now, yeah. I also work in HR, and it was a bit of a gut punch to read that recently in The Economist, they said that the 12 most feared words in the English language are, and I see it here, I'm from human resources, and I'm here to organize a diversity workshop. So, Randall, I'll stay with you. How do you avoid or prevent diversity fatigue as we continue to try to keep pushing the agenda forward?
Okay, there's a few things. So one, I just don't sit in HR. So I'm on the HR leadership team as well as the legal leadership team.
Which is an important distinction, I would imagine.
So I put my office on the legal side, so I'm far away from the HR wing.
Okay, all right.
Don't diss HR.
I don't. We're going to talk later.
Don't diss.
But here's the thing. One of the things that the way that this work is positioned within most companies, I think we get it wrong sometimes by sitting it in HR, because there's automatically that assumption that I'm going to roll out some training for you, versus the approach that I've tried to do in the last 2 or 3 jobs that I've had within organizations is to become a consultant within the organization where I seem like a third party. And so that goes back into the fatigue piece. I think it goes, and I'm going to get technical here, I think it goes into how an inclusion and diversity leader approaches the work. And so when we think about fatigue, we think about you're giving something to someone that they don't want, or too much of it. And as a consultant, I go into the organization and looking from a global perspective, my first question is, if I'm going to the division presidents, I'm going to the management team, is what is your business strategy? What areas of opportunity do you see from an inclusion perspective that can be helpful to you? So I'm not pushing anything down their throat. And so that's when you get to a point where it's not so much of a fatigue, because you're only working on the things that the business is asking you to work on.
Right.
And then the other piece is, do you have fail-safes in place to make sure that the organization isn't going through a fatigue, even though you're doing the right thing. So that's why it's so important to get in front of your management teams, in front of your senior leadership teams, to kind of put in front of them, this is the stuff that I'm working on. What's your perspective on this? Are we going at the right pace? Should we move things faster? Should we take a little step back? And so that's when you make sure that from a fatigue perspective, all of those things need to be in place in order to get it right.
That's great. Amy, do you want to weigh in?
I think what feels scary sometimes to people outside of HR and to leaders is when you just focus on the notion of diversity. You say, you have to go hire more diverse candidates. Because that can sound to people like, that's going to slow me down, right? I need people in seats first. But when you explain to them the notion of inclusion and belonging, which means creating a space and an environment where people feel they can do their best work of their careers, where they come into work and they feel safe, and they feel that they belong, and they feel that they're a part of something, and they feel that they can really bring everything about them and do their very best work, that makes sense to a hiring manager. Yeah, I don't want to lose great people. Yes, I want to grow an environment where people can do this kind of work and not be encumbered by wondering, am I paid the same as the guy who's sitting next to me? Or am I being promoted at the same rate? Or am I going to lose opportunity when I go on maternity leave? Or sort of whatever the issue is. If you can work with them on those things, I think it's a lot easier to sell and help people understand who aren't just in the HR function.
And some of what you just mentioned is really around transparency. I mean, it struck me when you just said that for someone to sit there and say, I know that I'm not being underpaid compared to the person next to me. We're in an age of transparency. I mean, certainly the UK gender pay gap statistics. You're both members of the GEI. Why is transparency so important, or more to the point, how is right now a turning point in how we look at diversity from a transparency standpoint? I'll ask anyone on the panel.
Well, one of the things before we get to now, we need to understand the past. Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. And I do believe that we're at a point right now, and I'll speak to women, it could be minorities, it could be however we wish to address it. We are at a point where we really stand to rewrite history and correct history. Correct history about the importance of how people have played into history. When we are teaching people, just colonize it to the US. When we are teaching people from textbooks that don't tell the whole story about who they are, we are cheating them of the opportunity to understand who they can be. So we need to be deliberate about rewriting history and teach it cleanly. Then progress it to where we are right now. Transparency is a really beautiful thing, and we have to appreciate it. But are we really being smart in how we're sharing stories with people and teaching people to succeed? There are organizations who are doing this so well, and you know them. Think about Weebing. This is Women's Business Enterprise Network. Pam Easton's doing a phenomenal job leading that group and working with corporations to develop opportunities for them, to help to support the communities they want. As are NMSDC, WPO, NGL, NCC, which I'm on a board member of. But I'll tell you this, something that's not being talked about a lot is something called Shoulder Up. And you guys are going to see it. It's bubbling, it's happening, and you've got beautiful people who are working it forward. I believe you're going to start to see it in the news now more. But this isn't, Shoulder Up is women telling their own stories, taking the veil off of their experiences, speaking, women who are very public figures who we know about. I believe the first one is going to be broadcast on August 26th. You can check in at Ask JB Agency when. But you're going to see that the transparency is happening. But as with most movements, things happen here and gain a lot of groundswell before they come to the focus, before they come to the point. But please look for Shoulder Up.
Shoulder Up, and it's women telling their stories.
Women telling their stories in dynamic ways, women you wouldn't believe, and some really incredible women are participating in this right now. Look for it.
All right, Shoulder Up, and with that, maybe I can ask you, Amy, because I read a story this week that you published about your own story around the motherhood penalty. So the motherhood penalty is the notion and the very real facts, and I've got some facts here, that women with kids are, in a Harvard study, they found that women with kids were rated 10% less competent than their counterparts, also women without children. Being a mother reduces a chance of a job offer by 37%, which is not the case for fathers. And in that same Harvard study, women with children were 8 times less likely to be referred for a promotion. However, that wasn't your story. And can you talk about that?
Absolutely. The data is real and it's out there. And I was very fortunate to have a personal story that wasn't that. I had 2 children. My first maternity leave, within coming back to work within a few weeks, I was promoted to vice president. My second maternity leave, while I was still on maternity leave and out for 4 months, I was promoted again. This was done by Spencer Raskoff, who's our CEO, and we still work together very closely today. But in making those decisions, he looked at me with the same lens he looked at all his other team members, and he promoted me without bias. That's easy to say, but put yourself in that situation. You're in a lean, fast-moving startup. You have an urgent business need. You need someone in this newly created vice president role. Do you take the person who's there and can take off and hit the ground running tomorrow, or do you say, yeah, she'd be good, but she's not coming back for 3 months, right? That's a hard, everyday thing for people to do. I was fortunate to be in an environment where that didn't happen to me, and I've passed that on. But it's something that we within companies need to train all of our managers to think that way, to think long-term on the growth and development of our employees and how we create long-term opportunities for them, not just solve the short-term urgent needs. It's something we do through training our managers, through unconscious bias, training and discussions to make sure that at promotion time and annual review time that we are training people to look with a lens of equity across all of their employees and make sure that they are judging performance in that same lens, no matter who they're talking about.
That's great, thank you. And we've only got a few minutes left, and this has flown by. So with the spirit of empowerment, because that's the theme of the panel, what is your ethos or mantra, and that can be a personal one or certainly the one that your company lives by, around empowerment across the life cycle? We've talked about, again, retention. You've talked about promotion. Janice, I'll start with you.
Well, my personal mantra is never compromise who you are to become who you wish to be professionally. That's really important to me, and I believe that it has been a cornerstone for how I've been able to achieve my life in any form of balance. I would like to just put a footnote on something. You know, we talked more than once today about the importance of calling things as they are and how important words are. I'd like to see us lose unconscious bias and call it what it is. It's unchecked bias. It's unchallenged bias. People are always conscious, especially in a work environment, of those things that will support their growth and their income. If you are not checked on bias in a way that tags to your growth or your income, then you will be more likely to continue it. It's a gift to call things as they are. We are living in a very important moment right now. Those of us in this room are focused on all of the right things. In many ways, we're singing to the choir. We're preaching to the choir here. One of the things that I think can be so important in how we deliver forward now is to understand that we also have to appreciate where people's personal experiences are in ways that help us in ours. We are in an age now where it's no longer just the me generation as for myself. It's a me generation defined by an M and an E that are putting people in a position to either be mother and natural or Eve and evil. And we've got to be clear on how we address that. We have regulatory requirements for many of the companies who are present here today. We have fiscal responsibility to shareholders and stakeholders, and we meet those dynamically. Let us then, as a community, be responsible to ourselves in that same way. Measure what we say matters. Deliver and pay for it, and it will pay us back.
Absolutely, and check the bias. And we are out of time, unfortunately, but I would like to thank our panelists for the spirited discussion, and please join me in thanking them.